The history of Mercy Ships is a fascinating journey of faith. As I've watched this organization endure many trials, I'm often reminded of Noah's Ark. People thought Noah was crazy, building this huge ship, having no related ship experience, and all the while claiming God's divine direction. Well, that's exactly how Mercy Ships started. Inexperienced young people without funds, but motivated by God's dream of helping the needy. Today we see a fleet of ships that combines ministry with modern technology. But the early days were another matter.
In the Bahamas, Hurricane Cleo is causing massive devastation. Power lines are down and many homes and businesses destroyed. 5 are confirmed dead.
As they huddled in an old World War II airplane hangar, 120 teenagers prayed for their own safety and for all on the island. Yet none of them had imagined that their summer mission would begin like this.
It was a frightening time. And another girl, we've forgotten her name, but I'm sure the Lord has remembered it very, very clearly, prayed a prayer that's the genesis of what is now Mercy Ships. Wouldn't it be wonderful if God had a ship?
A ship full of doctors, nurses, engineers, carpenters, blankets and clothing. A ship filled with cargo, so we could come in after a disaster like this and minister your love.
I imagine these teenagers felt a tremendous sense of responsibility, praying for their safety, but also praying for others in need. This young pioneering team represented Youth with a Mission, also known as YWAM. For most, it was their first missions experience. Little did they know that their prayer was actually the genesis of what would become a worldwide maritime ministry.
Under the leadership of Lauren Cunningham, Youth with a Mission continued to grow. Yet the early vision of a ship still lingered.
Don and I were both reared in Colorado, so for Don to be thinking God was speaking to him about a ship, I thought must certainly be the Lord. We hadn't even seen the ocean until we were teenagers.
The Stevens family had moved across the Atlantic to join the European work of Youth with a Mission. It was there that the leaders were directed to a ship named the Victoria.
The leaders of Youth with a Mission had tried in previous years to purchase a ship, but after months of work, this purchase fell through. Now, with this disappointment still fresh in their memory, both the expense and the practical operation of a ship-based ministry remained a complete unknown. So they prayed again for guidance. And this time, God's answer was clear. You can't make it happen on your own, but I can.
So while we were there, here was Don and some of his co-leaders negotiating with a shipping firm from a payphone in a campground. We were there with our 3 children, our youngest a baby, and about 400 others, the majority of us in tents. And it was humorous to all of us, I think, at the time, negotiating with these, what might be considered powerful businessmen from the lowly position of a payphone in a campground.
We negotiated with some other interested parties, particularly some Greek owners who really wanted her. But the Lord led us to the Minister of Maritime Affairs in Rome. He questioned us first thoroughly about our use. And we said, well, we want to use her as a mercy ship, a hospital ship. We want to use her in missions. He said, okay, if you'll sign on that, I'm an old man. I'm going to meet God myself one of these days, and I'd like to do something to help people. And then he arranged a very good price. Now for us it was a mountain, an unbelievably big amount, but for ships it was a very good price, $1 million.
The Victoria was quite a ship in her day. As a luxury cruise ship, she took wealthy passengers on exotic trips to the Far East. But the leaders of Youth with a Mission were obviously not thinking luxury. This ship presented the fulfillment of a dream, the resurrection of God's vision revealed through a prayer in the Bahamas. And so they renamed her the Anastasis, meaning resurrection. Her new mission? To bring hope and healing to refugees in third world nations. Yet her first ministry was not to a hurting world. For 3 years, the volunteer crew renovated the old ship, and in fact, each one paid a monthly fee to live and work on board. As they worked and prayed, their needs were met. and their faith in God grew stronger.
When I first joined full-time, it was down in Greece, and I arrived from the airport and we drove to the ship, and I had to get to the ship by launch. We had launches that would go to the ship 3 or 4 times a day. If you arrived too late for the last launch, you had to stay on shore overnight. If the weather was rough, we had to climb up a ladder to get into the ship. So if you left the ship early in the day and you didn't know what the weather was going to be like, it was a good idea to have at least a pair of pants with you so that if you had to climb up the ladder, you weren't indecent.
In that early pioneering period, we didn't have enough money to put fuel in the ship. Our chief engineer, John Brignall, would take 55-gallon drums, just a few of them, 3, 4, 5, put them in a Mercedes van and drive to the local petrol station and put diesel in to bring them back so that we could have what we called an hour of power. We were working in the dark in the ship for long periods of time, doing basic repairs. And we had an hour of power in the morning and an hour of power at night.
Throughout the years of renovation, the Anastasis kept on moving, from anchor to dry dock and back again. Like those who ridiculed Noah as he built the ark, there were some who believed the Anastasis would never sail. These critics referred to the ship ministry as the Noah syndrome.
It was a hard time, probably the hardest time I think anybody had ever worked on that ship, but it was one purpose, and God was there.
A crippling earthquake rattled the nation of Greece. The crew recognized the Lord's protection as the Anastasis remained anchored safely offshore. The crew responded to the crisis with practical aid in their first mission of mercy. In spite of this, the Greek officials placed a new restriction on the ship, allowing only 25 crew members to live and work on board the ship. The remaining crew found housing in a hotel, now closed by the earthquake. The crew felt banished from their ship. Without access to their usual kitchen, they managed to cook with camping stoves. Don Stephens initiated a 40-day period of prayer and fasting.
And then God chose to put a confirming miracle in the midst of our 40 days prayer and fasting focus. Fish started to jump out of the sea. First, it was 12, then one big one, then 212, and then the big event, if we can call it that, 8,301 fish. Just about 2 tons of fish jumped out of the sea. And when we got ready to sail, the local Greek pastors, Christian leaders, government officials, Lloyds, everyone came on board, and they said, we'd like to taste the fish, the miracle fish, because our Norwegian chief cook at the time prepared those fish 22 different ways. We saw that as God's hand saying, I am the God of provision. I'll provide for the fuel you need, the crew you need, all that you need for this ministry. And we recognized God had done this at a very special time for very special purposes.
The Anastasis required nearly 4 years of renovation to become seaworthy. So you can imagine the excitement the day the anchor came up, the engines were made ready, and at last she was sailing.
Now there was a little interesting thing that happened. As the anchor chain was coming up, it was fouled on the bottom, it was caught on some other things. Everyone's heart was like, oh no, we're not going to get out of here today after all, but we did. We sailed into Malta, and we've flown the Maltese flag that has that Maltese cross on the back of it that stands for the Beatitudes. And the Maltesers, the Knights of Malta and the Hospitallers were the first orders carrying for people with medicine in the Middle East in the Middle Ages. So there's a lot of significance in history of this Maltese ship sailing into Malta.
I remember that first sail. It was glorious. We sailed across a smooth Atlantic Ocean, watching porpoises and dolphins playing at the bow. We came in through the Panama Canal and then into Los Angeles to a crowd of 3,000, and Keith Green's song of Holy, Holy, Holy playing. For those of us on board the Anastasis, there was not a dry eye among us, and very few on the dock as well. And we spent 5 months gathering cargo, students, and volunteers, and in our very first ministry trip, stopping off in Guatemala, we delivered cargo valued more than what we had paid for the ship, helping a war-torn nation, and particularly Indians who had been at the brunt of the war, that we carried ashore by launches along with ministry teams for our first real ministry opportunity with the practical and the spiritual, proclaiming the good news and delivering cargo to hell.
It's fascinating how God gradually moved mercy ships onto bigger things, and sometimes with unexpected provisions. As the Anastasis ministered in Guatemala, a friend of Mercy Ships called, asking if the organization could use a second ship. The Good Samaritan joined the fleet, heading south to Central America and the Caribbean.
Years later, costly repairs took the Good Samaritan out of service. For 18 months, she sat idle, waiting to be sold. Then, in 1991, the U.S. Olympic Committee paid to renovate the ship, enabling her for service to Cuba's Pan American Games. The Good Samaritan was resurrected and filled, not only with Olympic equipment, but also thousands of Spanish Bibles, which were offloaded by Mercy Ship's crew. This unique partnership distinguished the Good Sam as the first vessel in 30 years to sail from America to communist Cuba.
In February of 1983, the Anastasis arrived in New Zealand. It was a wonderful tour. Visited about 15 different ports, was in New Zealand for just over 5 months. I think the whole of New Zealand got to know about the ministry of Mercy Ships through the Anastasis. And then from there, the Anastasis went out to work in the Pacific Islands where a hurricane had gone through, and the New Zealanders rallied around the ship and filled her up to go and work in the South Pacific.
As Hurricane Oscar ravaged the islands, the ship's crew responded with compassion. They formed construction teams, built water projects, and established medical and ministry teams. For the Anastasis, the nations of Fiji, Samoa, and Tonga represented their first mission involving every area of ministry.
God had been faithful. We had completed a 1.5 years of successful and exciting ministry in the South Pacific and sailed into beautiful Hawaii.
Thank you very much, and aloha, welcome to the Big Island.
In Hawaii, we sailed from port to port, but the Coast Guard came aboard and questioned our classification. We were fully certified with Lloyd's of London, completely seaworthy and safe, but Lloyd's had classified our ship as a cargo vessel, and while we weren't a cargo ship, we weren't a passenger ship either. There simply wasn't a classification that said Mercy Hospital Ship, but in order to become a passenger vessel, we had to have a sprinkler system on our ship. So we had no choice but to stop the ministry, go into debt, and install 4 miles of pipes and sprinklers. All the families moved ashore to live in 3 different campgrounds as we worked for 18 months. It was a difficult period in our history, for us personally and as a ministry.
During the Hawaiian episode, an alarming phone call came from Greece, charging Don Stevens with proselytizing, a crime punishable by imprisonment. Along with co-worker Alan Williams and Pastor Kostas Makris, they were summoned to stand trial in Greece. The entire case surrounded the giving of a New Testament to a teenager. The boy's mother was enraged and filed suit against the 3 men. In the first trial, they were sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. As they awaited a second trial, petitions from at least 25 countries flooded the courtroom. In the streets of Athens, protesters marched in support of religious freedom. Back on board the Anastasis, the Stevens family carefully considered the implications of a prison term. And within Mercy Ships, the management team prepared for change.
We had 4 million people, that's a conservative number, praying for us all over the world. And the end of the story is we were all exonerated. The presiding judge said that the people who brought the charges should probably thank us because of the wonderful testimony of this boy that had gotten the New Testament, who's now a young man.
I feel very happy about the result of the trial. And it's not because I really love those three men, but it's because what came out was the truth.
As Mercy Ships developed, a permanent land base was purchased. The ministry moved from a garage into a hotel building in San Pedro, California. To accommodate both offices and staff housing, the old building required extensive renovations. The staff converted the hotel's tavern into a center for street people. And as Mercy Ships ministered to its local community, their own public awareness increased. To serve this growing support base, communications developed, proclaiming God's faithfulness.
From Hawaii, we moved on to beautiful British Columbia. And Canada was as exciting for me as Hawaii was depressing. Now, we still had work to do. We were able to purchase 2 brand new generators for the ship, and we installed them. We had heard that British Columbia, particularly Vancouver Island, is the warmest spot of all of Canada in the winter. That winter, it snowed more than it had in 50 years. We had 6 inches of snow on the deck. We had cold weather, but it was a fun time and a meaningful time. And I think the reason it was most meaningful is our crew walked every city block of Victoria in prayer walks, and we prayed over every house, prayed over every business, and we partnered at a deeper level with the local church than we'd ever been able to at that point. And it did something for us, this partnership with the local church. It brought about a completeness and a wholeness for the ministry. And it also prepared us for the future. Church planting, relationships with various churches has become an integral part of all that Mercy Ships does.
As the Anastasis continued renovations in Canada, Mexico suffered a devastating earthquake with many buildings destroyed and tragic loss of life. Mercy Ships responded, sending a relief team south to the disaster. Later, the Anastasis sailed into Lázaro Cárdenas, the epicenter of the earthquake. Crew members ministered primarily in Mexico City, constructing housing and providing medical care. As they prayed for Mexico, Mercy Ships realized that a medical focus was essential for their ongoing ministry. In 1990, the Anastasis arrived in Togo, West Africa, and Mercy Ships began its long-term commitment to Africa's poor. For many, these ship visits would become their one chance in a lifetime for medical care. 2 sisters traveled to the Anastasis with their father's help. Both Cynthia and Mercy had been born with blinding cataracts. Although Dr. Dyer knew the ship's surgical schedule was full, he felt compelled to examine their eyes.
Can she see my finger here? She cannot.
That same day, a cancellation occurred, and Mercy was scheduled for surgery. Dr. Dyer carefully removed the cataract in one eye.
Take a look at you. She has never seen like this before, ever. Okay, you want to look right here? Oh, yeah.
The next day, Cynthia received her surgery.
Can she see anything?
Wow.
For the first time, both girls could see with one eye. 2 months later, they returned for surgery on the remaining eyes. The sisters would now see their world clearly.
Bye-bye.
In the remote islands of the South Pacific, the Pacific Ruby was added to the fleet. During her 5 years of service, she visited over 30 island communities in 11 nations, providing medical and dental care to nearly 20,000 patients. Later, the Pacific Ruby would be retired, replaced by the Good Samaritan, now called the Island Mercy. To continue its ministry in the Caribbean region, Mercy Ships acquired a Norwegian vessel, the Caribbean Mercy.
Mercy Ships continues to reach the poor with both medical and spiritual hope. Today, the Caribbean Mercy takes a surgical eye center to Central America and the Caribbean. Operation Sea Legs, a mobile prosthetics laboratory, provides amputees with lower limbs in war-torn regions like Nicaragua. But the greater vision of Mercy Ships, to train and send out Christian missionaries, would require a much larger facility.
On behalf of World Challenge, David Wilkerson made us a very good offer on his beautiful East Texas office. After much prayer, we purchased this property and moved out from California. Today, we can effectively prepare people for missions in medicine and agriculture and through biblical life training.
Since 1978, Mercy Ships has ministered in more than 50 nations. In the South Pacific, in Central and South America, in Eastern Europe, and the continent of Africa. Free medical care has touched over 70,000 lives with surgeries on board the ships and in remote villages through mobile medical teams. Using donated supplies, Mercy Ships has constructed clinics, hospital facilities, churches, fresh water wells, and schools. Relief cargo valued at $16 million has been offloaded and delivered by the crew. Underlying these varied projects, the motivation of this volunteer organization remains the same: extending the love of God to those in need.
Well, as I look back on the past, it gives me confidence to project for the future. We'll have more ships, 10 or more one of these days. Every major geographic region of the world should have a ship with doctors, nurses, dentists, carpenters, electricians, evangelists, housekeepers on board, sharing this love of the Lord Jesus. And He who has watched over His word to perform it this far, and it's His dream initially, He'll see us on to the future.
Many lives have found lasting hope and healing on board the Mercy Ships, but many others still live each day on the edge of survival. Mercy Ships continues to reach out to the world's needy with the help of ordinary people, just like you and me, who are living beyond themselves, catching the vision of new life and hope.